Let's get smarter with the help of our lead-off panel. Michael Schnell is here, MS Now congressional reporter. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for The New York Times. Dave Weigel, political reporter for Semaphore. And MS Now White House reporter Laura Barone Lopez is with me in New York. You are one of the reporters that broke that story on what we're in store for tonight. What more can you tell us?
So what we're expecting the president to do is to also, inside of this speech, talk about what he is going to allege was influence interference by China and by Chinese actors. And what we know, though, is that this was looked into in 2020 by President Trump's intelligence community, and that the president is going to simply declassify documents that have been classified up until this point that were include intelligence gathered by his analyst at the time, and those are likely going to sow confusion and distrust, because ultimately no one that I talk to, the sources that we talk to, whether it's current administration officials or former intelligence officials who worked in that first administration, Trump's first administration, no one says that Chinese interfered and influenced, so much so that they influenced the outcome of the 2020 election. They did not at all touch or manipulate votes and the outcome of the election. So we expect the president, though, to really zero in on China, and those around him, like Bill Pulte, who is the acting DNI, have encouraged him to declassify all of these intelligence documents that have to do with the 2020 election, whether it's regarding China or Iran or other foreign actors. And that's what we expect the president to talk about and to do later today.
Peter, I'm guessing he's not going to reference the Mueller report, which actually started by saying there were sweeping efforts by foreign actors, i.e. Russia, to influence the election. I'm guessing he's not going to talk about that. But you have covered many, many presidential addresses to the nation over the years. Can you put into context for us how unusual this one sounds like it's going to be?
It does sound like it's going to be unusual. Oval Office addresses to the nation traditionally are on matters of great national import that are not political. They don't usually have a political sheen, right? They're times of war. They're major disasters. There's large challenges to the nation when we have, some overarching concern that have people at home worried, and a president is trying to find ways of addressing their concerns, after riots or, remember the BP spill in the Gulf, that kind of thing. They don't usually concern things that are so overtly political and particularly overtly partisan. That's in fact one of the reasons why the networks didn't take President Biden's speech in September 2022, which was meant to be an Oval Office address. Sorry, not Oval Office. It was in Philadelphia, but a nighttime, primetime speech to the nation. That the networks decided not to take it live because they felt it was too political. That's the choice they have tonight. Do they take something that seems to be about advancing the president's political interest and the narrative that he has been trying to sell people on about the credibility of elections, meaning particularly elections he loses?
Brendan Carr is making these veiled threats against the networks. But for fact's sake, in the run-up to the 2022 midterms, President Biden gave a speech about the future of democracy, and the three major networks did not air it. And I'm not talking about them having the World Cup. You know what they aired? Reruns of Law and Order and Young Sheldon. Dave, what do you make of this latest push?
The Brendan Carr piece of it is the most interesting. The pressure on networks to air the speech. The political impact is, I wouldn't say it's nil, but if you listen to Democrats, especially Georgia Democrats, and Senator Jon Ossoff, the person who would be most implicated, if that's the right word, in what the president's going to talk about in 2020, they relish him doing this. They love when Republicans, egged on by the president, question the 2020 election. It is very far from the front of voters' minds. It was very far from the front of their minds in 2022, when Democrats overperformed a lot of states against Republicans who were obsessed with relitigating 2020. So the impact of the speech politically in the short term, Democrats are happy about this and Republicans. You've seen at the same time Republicans, when pressed on what the president might say, whether the 2020 elections in Georgia were rigged, they now, including the leader, John Thune, have been evasive about it. The president is able to move Republican rhetoric and positioning and reality to an extent in his own direction. So what Democrats are more worried about, I think, from the speech is not even where it airs, what it contains. It's more what actions would he take, would Bill Pulte take that interfere with vote counting, mail ballots, et cetera, in the upcoming election. This speech, they're happy to have him do it. Maybe a little bit too happy from the conversations I had.
Peter, is the White House weighing that? Because to Laura's first point, a speech like this sows distrust. What it really can do, to Dave's point, is have people distrust our president and puts Republicans in a tough spot.
Yeah, this is a president who is singularly obsessed with this topic, and no, he doesn't care that other Republicans don't want him to revisit it. He has come into office with one almost overarching goal, which is to prove that he didn't lose the 2020 election. He's not a loser. He hates the idea that he was a loser, and he has been talking about not only talking about, but using instruments of government to rewrite history for the last year and a half, whether it be taking, voter, records from Georgia with Tulsi Gabbard down there, whether it be, firing people who were part of the probe into his effort to overturn the 2020 election, whether it be creating a litmus test for anybody who is hired into his administration. They were asked the question, who won the 2020 election? If you gave the wrong answer, you didn't get the job. He has been trying to rewrite history ever since, and that seems to be, such a priority for him, even if it's not helpful politically to his own party.
Yeah, that's why it again came up yesterday in the confirmation hearing of Jay Clayton. He was asked about the 2020 election, and I want to share a bit of sound.
Do you deny that Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
Senator, I'm not an election denier. Joe Biden was certified as the president of the United States.
Can you tell me why Joe Biden was certified as the winner of the 2020 election?
I'm going back to my constitutional law here, but I don't want to continue to have a debate about this, but I believe he had the most electoral votes.
So he won the election.
Who won the 2020 election?
Like I said, I'm not going to get into that with you.
But you do have an obligation to be honest and forthright with the committee.
Is anything that I just said not honest or forthright?
Yes, you're not being honest or forthright. Who won the 2020 election?
I think I've answered the question. We can keep doing this.
Well, we're going to keep doing it because you're not being honest and forthright.
I'm not going to engage in the theater.
He's not going to engage in the theater. Please tell me, Michael, what are folks on the Hill saying? Because here in New York City, where Jay Clayton has a whole lot of support, definitely from the people that I cover on Wall Street, they always say he's a real guy. He's a smart guy. He couldn't just answer the question, who won the 2020 election? What are people on the Hill saying?
Yes, Steph, it's a concern for a lot of folks, but it's also a shock. Remember, this is somebody who would be taking the reins of the Department of the Office of Director of National Intelligence from Bill Pulte, who Democrats did not like, who Republicans did not like. When Jay Clayton's name came around, Democrats were thrilled. They said, we respected him when he led the SEC. We respected him when he was at SDNY. And we are okay with this guy overseeing the intelligence community. And that changed for a lot of Democrats yesterday. He could not simply say that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. Mark Kelly really got to the heart of this, of the difference between Jay Clayton saying that he was certified the winner and won the election. If you're certified, why are you certified? Because you won, but Jay Clayton could not say that. And this is not just existing in a vacuum. This is an issue specifically for the Director of National Intelligence, because there's a concern among Democrats that the person who oversees the intelligence community could cast doubt on incoming elections. By the way, the one that's just a few months away, the November midterms. This was an acute concern with Bill Pulte. It comes after Tulsi Gabbard had backed President Trump's claims that the 2020 election was stolen. After Tulsi Gabbard, the former DNI, involved herself in that search warrant in Fulton County, Georgia. She was spotted there helping as the FBI had seized those voting records. So before yesterday, I think a lot of Democrats were saying, we can actually support Jay Clayton. I like the guy. He's better than Bill Pulte. I was talking to a Democratic senator after the hearing yesterday who said Jay Clayton definitely lost a lot of support among Democrats after he could not answer that simple question of who won the 2020 election.
That's what's amazing. Democrats I spoke to in the last 2 weeks have said the same thing. Like, listen, he's the best of the bunch. I think he'll be okay. He's a responsible guy. And the tone was different last night. Let's talk about the other hearing, the confirmation hearing for Todd Blanche as Attorney General. It's not over. Today, it's going to continue with testimony from witnesses. That includes an Epstein survivor, and a member of the Department of Justice who Blanche fired. Talk to us about what's in store, Michael.
Yeah, the Epstein files are going to be on center stage today, Steph. We are going to see Danny Bensky, an Epstein survivor who's been very vocal about her experience and what she saw. We're going to see her testify. But I think this is all going to come back to the anti-weaponization fund, that $1.776 billion fund that the DOJ had set up. And then Todd Blanche had said it was dead during a previous hearing. But President Trump has still flirted with this idea. He recently said, I love it. He thinks it's a great idea. And Democrats and Republicans are concerned that actually it may not really be dead. This is all going to come down to Senator John Cornyn. He's the Republican from Texas. He had concerns before yesterday's hearing. He pressed Todd Blanche on that anti-weaponization fund. Blanche a number of times saying it was a moot point because he already declared it dead. But then again, senators noting, well, it's one thing for you to say that, but the president has not said that, pushing for it to be in writing that this will not be resurrected. Todd Blanche refusing to go there. John Cornyn, after that hearing, said that he didn't know how he was going to vote. He was not in favor of Blanche at that moment, still undecided. Significant, Steph, because if Todd Blanche loses just one Republican vote on that Senate Judiciary Committee, he stalled in committee. There are not the votes large enough to then advance him to the Senate floor. And let's not forget, John Cornyn doesn't owe Donald Trump anything. Donald Trump is the reason why John Cornyn will not be returning to the Senate next year after Trump backed his primary opponent and ultimately ousting him from office. Cornyn has been no shy person to criticizing the president and criticizing the administration. If he wants to put those words into action, it could come in the form of a vote against advancing Todd Blanche.